Hey there, everybody. It is me, Chris Herman, here for another episode of On Deck. And today is a very, very, very special episode that I think all of you in the retail automotive community are going to enjoy and get a lot out of. I am joined today by my very good friend, my brother in arms, Mr. Cliff Banks, owner and operator of the Banks Report, the Autovate conference, and anybody in our industry certainly understands Cliff's deep insight into our space from the retail perspective, the automotive perspective, and also the financial community. And I think we did a good job of covering almost all of it with some great nuggets in there. So without further ado, it's another episode of On Deck, and today we have Mr. Cliff Banks. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Mr. Cliff Banks. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chris. And we're fortunate there's only one and one only.
One and only. Yeah, right?
Yes.
Have you ever met another Cliff Banks?
There was a mayor of a town in the Midwest, Cliff Banks, who actually died. There's a Cliff Banks in Uganda, who I'm connected with on, or Cameroon, I think, whom I'm connected with on Facebook. And that's been interesting.
Yeah?
Yes. So, not too many others, though.
Okay. Well, Cliff, you're on deck, buddy. It's incredible to finally have you here.
Yes.
Right? We've been talking about it for some time.
Yes.
We've known each other forever.
Forever.
Friends, brothers in arms,
Yes.
compatriots, all kinds of things, whatever we want to call about it. And
Yes.
here we are on May the 4th.
May the 4th. Oh, okay.
May the 4th be with you.
I get the Star Wars thing in the poster. Okay,
That's
now
right.
I got it. Okay, I'm a little slow sometimes on the pop stuff.
You know, it is, for those of you, for our thousands of viewers and listeners, we are having a May the Quattro de Mayo. May the Quattro be with you? May the Quattro be... I can't remember what we called the damn party, but it's a mashup of like
Yes.
Cinco de Mayo and Star Wars.
Yes.
Hence the decor. The festivities will begin in a few hours, but here we are with an unlimited amount of time to sit down
Yes.
and catch up and talk about all things in the world we share. So, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm here in Fort Lauderdale. Great place to be, actually. Great city.
Agree. Well, it's great to have you, man. You know, over the years, we've had lots of conversations, and again, just maybe perhaps a more formal introduction would be appropriate. You know, Cliff, you are the owner and operator of the Banks Report.
Yes.
Which is and has always been a very highly trusted, high-level insight into the retail automotive space from a journalistic perspective. Not just retail automotive, but, you know, the financial sector, the deal sector.
Right.
And additionally, you head up the Autovate conference, which, you know, we've got a number of those under the belt over the years. And so I would imagine anybody watching right now would like to know, and then we're just going to veer wherever we want.
Sure.
What, you know, we're at a very interesting time in our industry, right? I mean, it's crazy. What do you see?
Well,
as we move forward here?
I'll tell you this. I think for the last couple of years now, whenever I give a presentation, one of my first slides has an image of a shattered crystal ball. I actually wrote this 4 or 5 years ago now. The years fly by, but that we were entering as an industry the greatest era of uncertainty that we've ever been in, going back over 100 years. You know, if you think about it, we've always known, you know, what type of propulsion system. Once we got through the early years, you know, the early 1900s, where EVs were somewhat commonplace. You know, we had the oil discovery in the Permian Basin in Texas. We had the development of the barges, which enabled the easy shipment of oil across the world. That in turn brought the automotive industry into the oil age, or to the, you know, the combustible engine. So we've known for a century or more that that's what was going to drive those cars. We've known what the ownership experience was going to be like. We knew what the buying experience. We buy the cars from dealers.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when you go back and look at some of the old articles in some of the early trade magazines, I'm talking the 19-teens, you'll see some headlines that if you took those and put them into trade magazines today, you wouldn't know which year they came from. They were dealing with some of the same issues,
right,
that we're dealing with today. Of course, a lot has changed, but the infrastructure of the industry has remained the same. One of my favorite images is, I think from 2017, Ford World Headquarters. They have, I think, 3 pickup trucks. One was the Model T pickup of the early 1900s that sold, I think, 1.9, nearly 2 million vehicles over a 10-year period of time. One of the best-selling vehicles of its time. And then on the other end, you have the F-150 from 2017, which was Ford's centennial year. And we're looking at that, and sure, the trucks have changed, the vehicles have changed somewhat, but other than that, nothing's changed.
Right.
Now we're going into an era where everything is up for grabs, and no one knows where it's going to end up. The EVs are coming on strong, at least the hype is, and the manufacturer plans.
Mm-hmm.
Ford is talking about selling hundreds of thousands of these by 2025. So are we going to get there? It's likely. I mean, when you drive one of these vehicles, it's a pretty awesome driving experience. Ownership experience may be a little
needs a little
bit leaves
a little up to be desired.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly with Tesla on the server side, I don't think they're set up yet to handle a massive number of sales. I think they're probably getting close to that line where it would become a real problem not having dealerships.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I mean, to go down that road a little bit, the whole direct-to-consumer model people are talking about. You see it every day on Twitter and in the media about how the dealer model is dead. We've been seeing that for 20 years or more.
Right.
But there does seem to be greater concern today. I think some of the manufacturers have created a lot of uncertainty in that area.
Particularly recently, it's interesting that you've gone down kind of 2 parallel connected paths right out of the gate. Right, one is EV,
right,
and then one is the vehicle distribution network, if you will, and I want to be able to dive into both because I find both areas really fascinating subject area. But the one thing that I find and have found recently very interesting about the distribution network is I've recently spoken to some people who are absolutely non-retail automotive people.
Right.
And they've all said the same thing. Is the dealer network in trouble?
Right.
Right. Are the manufacturers going to sell direct on EVs like Tesla? Right. And I was like, I feel like that's just being kind of hinted about a little bit in our industry from some of the comments of the leadership of the manufacturing companies. But I was really taken aback with the clarity of which these comments were brought to my attention by non-automotive people.
Right. Yeah, I think there's certainly, with the era of social media, it's become much more prominent out there that the idea that the manufacturers are going to start selling direct to consumers. Certainly the success of Tesla, and they've been very successful in their model, it raises that question. And then we have the Rivian and Lucid and some of these others that are coming in. Carvana's a dealer, but they had some early success as an online digital only dealer. I'll say this. I mean, not Bill Ford, but Jim Farley of Ford Motor Company really kicked it off, I think, early this year, just prior to NEDA, in some, I thought, very muddy comments.
Yeah, sort of alluded to things, right?
There's, I think, what we're seeing is with some of the automakers, like Ford, I think Mary Barra at General Motors, I think some of the lack of clarity that we're seeing from their comments, and you have to be paying attention to all to what they're saying at investor conferences or what they're saying at, in these days where they're launching vehicles or talking about their new EV platforms. And you have to almost listen to what they're not saying. And it creates questions, I think, in the dealers' minds and in analysts or observers like us who are saying, okay, well, where does the dealer fit in that world that they're talking about? And it's not really clear. Now, Ford has backtracked some, but clearly, I mean, they are working on new agreements with their dealers. They're working on a whole new infrastructure for their retail distribution system. How that looks, we'll see. It was interesting. Bob Carter in New York at the J.D. Power Forum with NADA a couple of weeks ago, he addressed it and said, listen, from his perspective, a direct-to-consumer model is a disaster waiting to happen. And he very clearly threw down the gauntlet on that model for Toyota. And basically, I'm convinced as long as Carter is in place there, we're not going to see a direct-to-consumer model from Toyota or even an attempt to go down that road. He's very supportive of their dealers. I think what we're going to see, and again, going back to my shattered crystal ball, this is guessing because all this is going to be coming to fruition within the next decade, probably sooner, right? I think we're going to see a model emerge where the manufacturers have much more control over their retail network and their distribution system and the processes and the data than what they have today. They may not. I don't think they're going to own the network, but I think they're going to be very, very aggressive in determining which dealers they want participating with them as partners, quote unquote partners, right. And they're going to pretty much dictate how those partners are going to operate. I mean, in some respects, we're seeing it right now with Polestar, owned by Volvo, really part of the Volvo family. And the dealers, I've talked to dealers on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and both very successful with the Polestar franchise. And they both have come to grips and have said, hey, we're just playing by what, the Polestar rules, what they've established. Now, to be fair, the person, the management team running Polestar seems to be very friendly and very, open-minded to working with dealers, with their dealers. So it's not just an autocratic my way or the highway. They're working with dealers to create the best system possible. But still, it's coming from the manufacturer. Now, we've had that in place to some degree based upon, and I think it's based upon the manufacturer. And it's still going to be that way. But if we look at what's happening with the connected vehicle, I think that over time, over the next few years, the manufacturer is going to have all of that connected vehicle data. Now, whether they can execute on that data and execute the right model and the right process is a big question. But nevertheless, they're going to have that data. And it's going to be data they've never had before. Every customer is downloading the...
Excuse me.
God bless you.
Thank
there,
you.
Chris.
Thank you.
I think every consumer that buys a new car at some point is going to have a phone app for that vehicle on their phone. And the type of data and information that those manufacturers can glean from that phone app, whether customer behavior is unbelievable. So
I've shared in a number of other episodes, particularly the ones that I just do a monologue and talk about a particular topic. I've shared what I would say would be my thoughts and analysis of information that I have learned from you and or from being at Autovate and listening, to what's going on in the industry. And there's, let me just give you the kind of the rough of the way I see it.
Yeah.
You've got an incredible amount. Okay, first of all, we're operating in a very challenged environment from supply chain. We've had a microchip process, problem for some time. Who knows if we start to see other disruptions in the supply chain as a result of Ukraine? People talk about wiring harness, all this stuff. So we've got a business that the throughput of inventory is challenged. We've got a continual effort of retail automotive, larger companies, retailers consolidating. You have the manufacturers not loving how much money is on the balance sheet of car dealers right now as a result of the profitability in these transactions. You've got the connected car thing, which throws in this, whose customer is it as we move forward. You got the major manufacturers all secretly or not so secretly having a little bit of a love affair with Elon and what he's done with Tesla.
Sure.
And then you've got this federal push for EVs, and not only the demand and or supply of those vehicles, but the pressure it's going to put on the retailers in terms of their actual facilities.
Right.
And then you've got sort of these independent little stores still left that have not consolidated, and or stores that are run by second and or third generation family members that might not have the same ability to navigate through all this.
Right.
I mean, it's like there's like a big storm brewing that I kind of see could be real problematic for the independent, family-owned businesses over the next 5 to 10 years. Am I?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because I talk often about that, and I think we even said this at Autovate, and Dale Pollack and I were talking about this on stage. It's really go big or go home.
Right.
And I think as a dealer, you really have to look at expanding your operations within and creating, whether it's a regional powerhouse or a local powerhouse within, a city or town, and becoming the biggest player or one of the biggest players in town. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to compete. I think you also have to have capital, because a lot of this, what we're seeing is going to demand and require capital. Like you mentioned, even just the facility requirements on the EV side, but not just that, but new ways of marketing. Mm-hmm. There's going to be challenges from a capital perspective. So we're seeing, and you talked about the consolidation, we certainly are seeing that. I think last year, 650 rooftops changed hands. The average the previous 10 years was about 354, I believe. So that was a huge uptake. The manufacturers, the 6 public dealer groups from 2011 to 2020 had acquired, I think it was 333 stores or 335. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Last year in 2021, it was 225 stores, I think, that they acquired. So you could see the massive change in behavior on the buy-sell market. Mm-hmm. And part of that is driven by fear of the future or the uncertainty of the future, but it's also driven by the fact that there's been just a huge increase in capital, and the dealers the dealers with the capital have to find ways to deploy it. And certainly on the public side, there's only so many shares you can rebuy or buy back, and to keep the investors happy and keep that stock price going, you have to buy. Now, it's interesting. I've seen some headlines recently from some of the brokers talking about how this pace is going to continue that we saw last year is going to continue into this year.
The acquisition pace?
Yeah, the buy-sell pace. And I had this conversation at NEDA with someone. I disagreed with that thought, and I think the numbers are starting to bear me out. I think it's going to fall back to this year, back to normal, what we've seen over the past decade. And the numbers are showing that. We're at, I think, between 90 and 100 rooftops have changed hands far this year.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on pace really for
240, 250.
No, it's probably pushing 270 to 300.
Okay.
But we're even under. I mean, we're way under the average.
What do you think is slowing it down?
Well, we may see a more aggressive towards the end of the year, but there were a lot of deals that got done before the end of the year. A lot of capital was deployed. Some of the big, we saw a significant number of large deals. When I say large, we're talking 20 to 30 to, we saw Larry Miller go. You saw Prime. We saw, Rick Ford sold to Sonic his 20 some stores. I think he had 33 in all that were combined new and used. So we saw a lot of large deals, transactions go down. It's hard to digest those.
Yeah, right.
It takes time.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually, it's one thing to add more stores to your balance sheet. It's another thing to go in and operate 20 new stores and get them folded into your company culture, if you will. Right.
So I think the pace is not even the first half of the year. The pace has slowed down considerably. Plus, there's more uncertainty now. I mean, what we didn't have last year, we didn't have a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
We didn't have the threat of interest rates being increased, and I think today is, I don't know, I think the meeting is going on probably as we speak with the Fed. Mm-hmm. And so we should find out today what the Fed is going to do, at least in the short term. I think now that interest rate, if it goes up half a percent or whatever, isn't going to move the needle at all or affect consumer behavior, I don't think. But it may
not too much when there's so much demand and so little supply.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah. You're right. There's so much demand. We're at 13 to 14 million retail sales, which is about 2 million under what it normally is.
Right.
There's a lot of demand there, and we still do not have the inventory to meet that demand. So we are going to be dealing with that for quite some time.
For a long time. As we were talking earlier, we're talking years before this stuff starts to loosen up. And who's to say that it does? Right now, I think there's been a sort of a general tone from manufacturers and dealers that, hey, this is a better model, right? Selling less for more is a good model.
Sure.
And now it truly is so far off in the distance that it's hardly worth speculating about. But there was a time when when we were all sort of under the illusion that inventory was coming back in the next 4, 5, 6 months, but nothing's going to change. The manufacturers are going to keep it slow, dealers are going to keep it slow. We're going to make gross profit, and everything's going to be wonderful. And we all know that there's going to be one Yahoo brand or one Yahoo dealer in the marketplace that's going to say, I can steal market share.
Right.
And that will just start the race back to where we've been.
Right.
But now, it's so far away at this point in time, you wonder if this just starts to settle in a different business model that maybe doesn't get tampered with quite as much down the road.
Yeah, I think, it's, when you start talking about the day supply inventory on the ground, and Bob Carter from Toyota, I think, has just a wonderful perspective of this. They were down to, I forget what he said, 3 days inventory at one point. I forget what the numbers were. I don't have my notebook in front of me, but he said, we're probably going to get back to I think 30-day supply, and that's where they want to be. Mm-hmm. But that's going to take, some time. He doesn't see that happening till late 2023, maybe going into 2024. So to your point, can we, as an industry, train the consumer, the buyer, to think in those terms of one price, paying above or paying MSRP? And the automakers certainly can increase that MSRP.
Right. Well, I mean, they're being forced to be accept it right now. A guy that I had in here just the other day, non-automotive guy, we were talking, and he was one of the people that brought up the whole shift in retailing strategy. But he indicated to me, he's like, listen, I wanted a BMW for years. He's like, for years I was interested in a Tesla, but it was, you had to wait. I didn't want to wait.
Right.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And he said, so recently, I went to a local, one of the larger BMW dealers here in South Florida, and I went through the process, and they're like, you got to pay all the money, and it's going to take like 2 months, or 3 months for you to get the car. And he's like, Chris, at that moment, I went out in my car, I got out my phone, and 15 minutes later, I had bought a Tesla. He's like, if I had to wait 2 months in either direction,
buy the Tesla.
I just did it. 15 minutes later on the app, I was done.
Yep.
And so there was no discussion of price or any of that stuff. So, everybody's being conditioned right now that if you want something, you're going to have to pay for it.
Right. And you're still going to have to wait for it.
And you're still going to have to wait. So if we've got a couple years of that, I don't know if that's enough time for that to settle in as like, this is just how it's done.
Right.
But then that leads me back to where you were kind of going with, there's been this sort of like, where there's smoke, there's fire, but the smoke being this sort of these illusions that like, well, maybe the dealer network is going to be the internal combustion network, and then maybe there are other ways that we can launch EV brands and sell direct, and as you mentioned, there has been a little bit of a tipping of the hat to that. Not unlikely for that to try to move.
No, it's not. But the other thing I would watch closely is, the Rivian and Lucid over the next year or two. If they stumble coming out of the gate a little bit with their models, it may take some of that luster off that direct-to-consumer idea. It is concerning when you hear the manufacturers talking about, and Ford has said this, Stellantis' CEO Carlos Tavares has said this, that that the current retail model adds as much as $2,000 to the price of a vehicle. I'm like, well, maybe it's not so much the retail model, maybe it's the whole driving, trying to drive sales and create sales. I mean, a lot of that, I would say a great portion of that $2,000, if it's an accurate figure, I wonder, I would debate, but is probably due to incentive spending.
Well, I mean, without a doubt, that's a large piece of it. I'd be curious how they would attribute, like, just, I mean, how much does the manufacturer actually have to pay for the dealer model, right?
The dealer's paying for all that. They get their pound of flesh from the dealer. So, it's an interesting world. So what I'm seeing is just, the next 5 to 10 years, we really don't know where this is going to end up.
Well, it's sort of funny to say this, right? And it's going to feel weird, but like in the next 5 to 10 years, like you and I are like 60-year-old. Like that just fucking
it blows my mind.
That doesn't even seem right. But you just wonder. Okay, obviously I grew up around the car business. My dad was in the business. You've been around this business forever, and I know that you're a very strong advocate for dealers, right?
Yes,
without a doubt. You just wonder sometimes, though. At what point does this model not work anymore? And I don't know what that is, because I'd be curious. The publics can only, I guess, get so big right now because of manufacturer restriction on points.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Now, Lithia has said that they've found a way around that. Asbury too. But listen, Asbury has sold 7 stores this year.
I think we just read this.
Right. Well, and we knew they would. But anyone that follows that closely knew they were going to end up selling several of those stores, and several of them in Colorado, because they owned, I forget what the percentage was, but they owned probably half of the Toyota market in the entire state of Colorado based upon their 2 acquisitions.
Right.
So of course they're going to have to sell, and they knew that. I mean, but they didn't know they were going to close that Miller deal when they bought the Stevenson deal. Mm-hmm. So it was a matter of timing for them. So now they have to offload some of those stores. Lithia is offloading stores. I mean, he sold off most of the Carboni deals in Pennsylvania, New York, wherever that was. And some of that was right-sizing their portfolio.
Just think about that. The I don't want to say the free availability of capital, but capital is much more available right now. Yes. And you look at the large publics. It's no longer, they're no longer just acquiring. Now they're acquiring and really building, their perfect players, right?
Yes.
And now we got to dump a couple of Toyota stores, which would sound like nobody would do that, right? But if it means your whole deal is that much more profitable, then you do it.
Yes. And they've pretty much, they have operated that way. It's good to see, I don't want to take a shot at automotive news, but it's good to see them finally covering it from that angle. I mean, maybe for me personally, it's probably not a good thing, because I think I was the only one covering it from that perspective and with that kind of deep knowledge for
the
years.
perspective again being
Just the investor perspective,
right.
the portfolio perspective. But Automotive News has certainly expanded their coverage in the last year and is doing a really good job, I think, of starting to cover some of those things that weren't readily available to the public or to even casual observers of the industry.
And that's the level of insight that you've always brought to the table, which has, been one of your trademarks is, you're strongly pro dealer and always have been.
Yeah.
But your relationships with an understanding of the financial and investment community and how they operate and how they look at this has always been, part of how you view the deal.
Yeah, I think it was interesting when go back to my days at Ward's, and as I was doing the ranking issues, we had the Ward's Mega Dealer 100 and the Ward's Dealer 500 and the E100, but certainly the Mega Dealer 100. As I started getting my head into that and covering that, I think the light bulb moment went off when Michael Dell had tried acquiring the. Now your dad was part of those conversations.
Yes,
in fact, it tried acquiring the Asbury Group, and that was like one of the aha moments. Now, Bill Gates and Lambert were involved with AutoNation, and but they were. I don't know that really triggered anything with me from a coverage perspective until it was that transaction that didn't happen with Michael Dell's private equity firm, and I think I really began to notice and understand the level of influence and impact that investor strategy has in this industry, both at the dealer level and at the vendor level. So I started focusing a lot of my efforts on my coverage, trying to understand that part of the market, because I didn't see anyone else covering it from that perspective, at least at the retail level. Some at the OEM and supplier level, but not at the retail level. So I went to school, trying to understand and know who the players were and what the big strategic plays and how they would and how these the public dealer groups and the large groups approached their portfolios.
Is there room in the space for another large private group to go public?
It depends who you talk to. You'll get a different answer,
right?
I think it would have happened by now. The last one was Asbury, and that was about 20 years ago now.
God.
So,
it's hard to believe that, in a space that's this robust and that there are some large, pretty significant private groups that nobody else has stuck there. I didn't realize it was 20 years. That's a long time,
I think
right?
so, yeah. It was, we won here in South Florida, LMP, which tried. No one really, I think, expected them to survive or to make a big play. Their efforts cratered last year. I think they're trying to sell off the rest of their stores.
I think I remember reading something about that. Yeah.
Yeah. There were, but that was never going to be a big play. It's interesting because I've asked that question too. Do we have another player? We got some big. Listen, there's some big groups. Certainly you had Miller, but you have Terry Taylor, who's under the radar. But that's 100
I know we've 20.
He's here in South Florida.
Oh, I know. Our new media director worked with the organization for 10, 15 years. I got another friend. Drummer in our band works in their marketing department.
But
he's like a real off the radar kind of dude.
Stephen Fader, who owns Mile One. That's another really large group and one of the largest privately held groups. You have Rick Hendrick. You have some players that really there's some intriguing possibilities, but. I launched the Banks Report when we launched 2013, and I've been asking that question, watching that, and it's 9 years ago, almost 9 years, 8.5 years ago. And there's always been rumors, there's conversations, but nothing's happened. And and it's more likely that one of the publics would be taken private, And in fact, I think, last year around this time, we almost saw that happen.
Mm-hmm.
There was a deal that was getting pretty close that never materialized. But, I think that's more likely. But now with the money, listen, I'll take Sonic.
Have any public companies just recently been purchased and brought private?
No. I mean...
I'm talking outside of space. Yeah, Twitter.
Oh, yeah, Twitter. Well, that deal's not done yet. That deal's not done yet. I just, we'll see how that how that one plays out. But no, it's fascinating. Now, again, in the over a decade ago, and we're probably talking 15, 16 years ago. I'm probably talking out of school here, and I apologize to you guys, but I think AutoNation and Penske both made plays for Asbury. And I think AutoNation the deal was done, and manufacturers said no. Mm-hmm. I partially because I think in part they didn't want one of the dealer groups getting too big.
Right.
Obviously. And that was the thinking back then.
Sure. And you can understand from the manufacturer perspective that, it's a delicate balance of maintaining a productive, positive relationship with your dealer body, but still maintaining some level of control over the process, and then having somebody get so darn big that you're like, okay, now we have a potential problem on our hands.
But to your point, Chris, it's interesting though. I look at the dealership environment as being I liken it to, and I've been saying this for years, it's one of the last great bastions of American entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
Really. I mean, and you think about the ranchers in the West in the 1800s, and it's almost, the dealers are cut from the same cloth.
I agree.
Right. And I think that is disappearing and going away to some extent. And think about it, if you're a manufacturer, like for years, with the way our sales and distribution work, the dealer has to buy those vehicles from the manufacturer. Now the manufacturer's pumping out vehicles as aggressively as they can because they want to keep their plants running.
Right.
So they got to keep pushing those sales. They're driving incentives. But let's say I'm Toyota. I'm the Toyota zone rep, and I know I've got these 15 white Camrys that no one's going to want to buy, and I've got them dumped on me. My monthly bonus or quarterly bonus is dependent on how many cars I can get you to buy. I come in. I've got a relationship with you. I come in to the store. And, hey, Chris, listen, you
help me out
take
a
these,
little bit.
take these off my hand. I'll hook you up next month, or I'll hook you up a little bit later. I mean, those kinds of conversations went on all the time, and I think that part of the business at some point may be disappearing. Now, it's probably still in play today because you got a lot of dealers who are begging for inventory.
Right.
So there's probably some of that going on. But
I think to touch on what is really your main point is that, when I think of dealers, right? I think of dealers, of course, I think of dealers more of my father's generation. I wouldn't call my father a dealer. He was a retail car guy without a doubt. But that generation of men, mostly men now, that are 70 to 80, right? That came up through the business that really were cutting their teeth in the 70s into the 80s is when they were maybe like 40 years old, and that's when they were. But they went through a time in the business that was just so different, right? It was way more aggressive. It was way more kind of street. It was way more the Wild West, right? And those are the men and women who really, quite frankly, kind of, developed the balls to be able to, be strong with the manufacturer, right? Be strong in their marketplace and develop. And I'm not here to say that the next generation or two after that, I'm sure that there are plenty of solid operators.
Yes.
But I sometimes wonder about the generation now that might be in their 20s, 30s, that have come into the business in more of the digital marketing world. The business isn't quite as rough and tumble as it was. It's a little cleaner. And I just wonder if that generation just doesn't have what it takes.
Yeah,
it's a dangerous. I can say something like that. I could probably say something like that, but and it doesn't. It won't really have any impact. At least I don't think. But I just wonder.
Yeah, well, I've seen it on both sides, and I think the name we give it is PhD. Papa had a dealership, right?
Right.
I've seen it both ways. I mean, I've seen some second, third, fourth generations that have been as good or better than their parents.
Right.
On in this business, I've seen some that have just been horrible. But I think I don't know that there's any rule or.
Yeah.
I don't. I know that the anecdotes are there and the conception or the perception is out there. But like I said, I've interviewed way too many of these folks over 20 some years, and sometimes it never ceases to amaze me how, I would say, brilliant and how gutsy several of these folks are.
Good.
That are. I mean,
I don't want my perception to be right, because I love the car business. To your earlier point, I mean it's just one of the great entrepreneurial businesses in the United States, and that's what I love most about it is the fact that almost anybody could get into it, and through really hard work, determination, and growth, possibly end up as a dealer, right?
Well, I just talked to a dealer a couple of weeks ago who just recently got into the business a couple of years ago. And I asked him if he thought he would have been able to get into it now. And we're talking 2 years. And he said no. He said there's no way I could do it now. There's no way I could have gotten the capital necessary. There's just too much.
The cost of entry now is crazy.
And that's just within 2 years.
Right.
So...
Well, you have a lot of guys that the sweat equity. They may be maybe they may be borrowed 10% to put some skin in the game, and through sweat work their way in, and maybe bought a large minority share or something like that, and then went off and sold that and bought a small deal that was 100% of their own. That's a tougher thing to do right now.
But again, I think this one of the points that we're talking about. It has become much more corporate. I mean. I just, before we were on this podcast, jumped on the podcast, and this morning my flight down, and this afternoon I've been reading through the transcripts of the most recent earnings calls over the last week from the publics. I do them every quarter. I read them every quarter, and it's if you haven't had a chance to read through one of them, just go on Seeking Alpha or on the website, on their websites, investor relations pages, and pull those up and read. And you just start seeing all the terms, the BPS, the GP. I mean, just all the ways that they're looking at
the business.
And thinking it's a car deal, but this thing is a complicated business. And certainly you get to the public, to that larger group level. I mean, that you have to have a doctorate in finance and economics to be able to understand this stuff. And certainly have their CFOs who are very talented,
right,
for the most part. And
the business has become a lot more sophisticated.
It has.
There's not to say there's always been smart people in the business, but I think that the smart people were a little bit more street smart and just understood the nitty gritty of the business.
Right.
Now you're talking about significant Wall Street influence and and that's where some of the next generations I think are actually excelling. The ones who really understand Wall Street and how the financial community works and its influence on the business. Right.
But it doesn't. But I'll tell you. You spend some time talking to Rick Ford from RFJ, he just sold to Sonic. $800 million deal. I mean, and you look at where he started and where he's at and where he's in, and getting a deal like that done. Or you look at, the Prime Group, David Rosenberg up there in New England, or, it's amazing to think about the things that they've had to learn. I think through their,
to be able to make it into that world, to develop their platform, and then ultimately take it to the table, with the big boys, for big money like that. Yeah, that's no small feat.
No.
All right, so I guess what I'm hearing from you is the American dealer generation after generation still may be stronger than I sometimes wonder if it is.
I think it is. I mean, look, there's all. I think dealers are in good dealers, and look, there's some bad dealers, and there's some bad employees at these dealerships. I mean, we see stories often.
Yeah,
and we've met. We see the stories, and there was a big one recently. I mean, where a large dealer group got slammed, slapped pretty hard with a pretty large fine, and probably deservedly so. Sometimes you wonder, is like, why? I mean, but again, you're looking at a business in which 18,200 or so dealerships are engaging in, 350 to 400 million transactions, financial transactions, interactions a year. No business is immune from some bad actors in the deal. Just 2 weeks ago, so I was in Phoenix, and I had an Uber driver who, every time if you fly into Phoenix and you're driving whatever highway it is, you're driving past Carvana's headquarters, and Carvana had just announced their earnings the day before, and it was pretty bad. I mean, it was a big miss. And my Uber driver was from Detroit several years ago, but his wife had been in the auto industry, so he understood it. And he made a comment about Carvana, and he said, "Wow, those guys." He goes, "It's just so frustrating." He wanted a specific trim, Suburban, and he got it. He found it. The only place he found it was on Carvana. And it was in a different state, so he bought it, but he couldn't get the title for 4 months. So, ironically, that day or the next day, a guy was put in contact with a consumer affairs reporter who was wanting to do a story about dealers not being able to get the title to the customers, and the question was phrasing, "Why are they having a problem all of a sudden?" I had to redirect his attention on that story, saying, "Look, it's not car dealers; it's two companies, two online retailers,
right,
who don't have the processes in place. They don't have the relationships with the DMVs. They don't have that institutional know-how that's been built up over decades at the dealership level, and those relationships that they've created to be able to understand and get through some of those challenges."
Right, and they're retailing around the country.
Right, yeah, and they have to deal with 50 states, so very complicated. And so, but the the immediate reaction is to blame all dealers and lump them all in. So I think that some of the problems. Look, you look at social media, we read the media, and no one likes dealers. It's clear. I mean, look, a lot of those are myths and legends and reputations that are well earned, unfortunately.
Sure.
But still, from a business perspective, what's the best way to get that car into the customer's hands and service that customer throughout the life cycle of that vehicle
through the dealer network?
There's no better way.
Right.
On all fronts, from the OEM, from a financial and a risk, and it's the most efficient way. It's messy at times, but it is efficient, and it does work. And we've had a century of it.
And the manufacturers have proven routinely that they struggle at going in the other direction.
Yes.
They're not retailers.
Right.
They're just not. They're wholesalers.
Right.
I mean, for lack of better terminology, they're from a sales perspective.
Right.
What you talk about how auto dealers, listen, and we all know, they have a terrible reputation and stuff like that. But man, I mean, you and I have both interacted with you more, with thousands of dealers. I like them as people.
Right.
I really do. I mean, I don't know that I can think of a single dealer that I've spent time with. I mean, I really can't. That I was like, interesting person.
Right.
Enjoyed being around them. Enjoyed spending time. What is it for you that has drawn you to the community, and what do you like? Like what's the essence for you?
Well, I part of it goes back to my early days at Wards, right? And I had worked in the industry, in the retail industry, for several years, not as a journalist, but being inside dealerships, helping manufacturers launch new vehicles or do training of dealers. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the dealership, so I understood that world a little bit. And then when I joined Wards, and just my career could have taken any number of paths. But honestly, I ended up with Wards Dealer Business, and Wards had supplier, manufacturer magazines. It just so happened that on the dealer side, we had an assistant editor that had died, and so a slot opened up, and then the person above me ended up leaving for certain reasons. That created more of an opportunity.
Sure.
So I, and then I started doing, dealer cover stories, starting to talk to dealers all the time. And then you just, I don't know, again, it goes back to, I was picking the road less traveled. Mm-hmm. I think, typically that was, if you look at some of the other trade magazines like Automotive News, people would be on that beat for a little while and then leave and move on to a different beat. I decided to stick with that beat, and it worked out very well.
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood.
Yes.
And so, Cliff chose dealers.
I mean, in some of it, it's just, it's where the opportunities were. So I took them. But I really did enjoy, to your point, the conversations and meeting these folks and telling their stories. Mm-hmm. And they were all unique and incredible stories that, just of determination, guts, risk, luck, failure, rebounding. So listen, we all have our faults, and I think there's certainly plenty of bad actors in this space, in this industry. I mean, you're just going to have that. It's the numbers are. So I'm not trying to be gloss over that, but from an aspect of storytelling, and yeah, as a journalist, I think there were some phenomenal stories and just characters in this space that
I'm with you. Just like real characters, larger than life personalities, risk takers.
Yes.
Roll their sleeves up, get the work done. Right. Make shit happen. Like all of those, descriptors for me were the things that I've always, enjoyed most about people in the car business. I grew up around car people. I've been in and out of, the world of retail automotive my entire life. I like the people.
Right.
I do. I just like the people that find their way into the business. Yeah. And I always have.
Right.
And I know that I always will.
Yeah.
Because it's just an interest. There's just something.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, some of it was just where that was where the roads opened up for me and the opportunities were. Because on the manufacturing side, with some of those manufacturers, those stories are crazy. And I mean, just recently with Carl's Ghosn and Nissan. I mean, getting smuggled out of
what do you get?
In a music box by two
like
former special forces. I mean, you can't even imagine that, right? So I think every industry has those a character,
Yeah.
So, but automotive certainly is a. When you think about the gamut and the spectrum of where we are, small business owner, Main Street, small town, dealer, and there's thousands of them, maybe hundreds now. And then you have the big Wall Street and global players that are involved. I mean, from Bill Gates to Michael Dell to, whoever else. I mean, there's just a variety of characters, variety of stories to tell, and to cover.
Oh, I would love. Wouldn't you love? I mean, I've always thought about it would be great to do. At one point in time, I thought it'd be like cool to do like a coffee table book. Like that's just all like you highlight 24 dealers or something like that, and do like a really nice piece on each one. But now, from a video perspective, it'd be really cool to like really do like a nice piece.
Well, there you go.
Exactly on dealers. So we'll chalk that down.
Yes.
If I may, I want to shift gears back to the beginning of our conversation when you talk about your broken and smashed crystal ball, but one part of that was EVs. I mean, you can't talk about the retail automotive business without talking about EVs. And I mean, I watched this. I watched I'm just going to go out there. I watched this lunacy with a sense of like dumbfounded amazement, right? And the reason, and these thoughts and views are mine and mine alone. But okay, I'm all for doing what we can to make sure that the environment is healthy and the planet is healthy. Like I'm 100% there. When you look at the electric vehicle, to me, from start to finish, and what it actually takes to do,
right?
It really doesn't look like a real solid contributor to the quality of the environment.
Right.
And there is this insane push. Everybody's racing and scrambling to make it happen, right? And I'm like, and everybody's, all for it and this and that. And they don't think about the amount of, materials that need to be dug out of the earth. The whole deal. What do you do with the batteries when you're done? Okay, whatever. But like, what is driving this, right? Because clearly there's people smarter than you and I, way further up on this equation, looking at it, I would think, that are facilitating the push in this direction. What is going on here? Because it just seems like, manufacturer, we're going to be 100% EV in like 3 years. Entire fleet, right? How are we going to facilitate that? How are we going to provide the electricity to make it all help me out here, Cliff.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Well, I think there's a few of us that are confused. Some of it now is, I think we've reached a place where you just make it up as you go along, and you hope some of these things are going to work out. I mean, if we wait till we have enough electricity, or the infrastructure has enough electricity,
right,
load to handle the EVs, we would never get there.
Right.
To your point, there's people push that hype and have sold this hype. California, I think bears a lot of the credit or blame,
right,
depending on your perspective.
Yeah, I realize this. This is it's a challenging topic because you can't. It's hard to have a conversation about it objectively and look at all pieces of it without dipping your toe into some partisan opinions to some degree,
sure,
which then take away from the ability to just have a meaningful conversation about it.
Right.
Because if you question some piece of it, well, then you must align with
denying science.
Yeah, you're denying science, or you align with a particular, down the line set of ideas, and it's like no, but let's look at this from an environmental perspective. Let's look at it from a business perspective. Let's look at it from the excitement of creating new technology. Like all of this stuff plays into it. But it just seems like we're racing down this road, and I know you've said like we're not going to get to where they want to be, but we're going to get somewhere.
Yeah. I think it's gonna take longer, but why are we where we are today? Well, certainly Tesla's success.
Yes,
and it's like I think Bob Carter said. I said the exact same thing. I keep quoting him, but I'm just going to stop making predictions about Tesla because I've been wrong all along. I don't think the final. I don't think we've reached or Tesla's reached the point yet where their retail strategy is hurting them. I think you think
they reach a point where it starts to.
Yeah, I think we're just the level of sales to volume number at some point without having dealers to to service and to manage that, I think is going to become a problem. I don't think they're there yet. I think they're getting close. But certainly Tesla has driven, the success of Tesla has shown that this can be done. Plus, the investors have bought into the Tesla story. So now you have the investment community hammering General Motors, Ford.
Right.
And Ford is somewhat insulated because the family controls that stock, but you still want to see that stock grow, increase and grow, and Ford wasn't seeing that. I mean, the family is
I didn't realize
pushing
that.
it. Yeah. So what that means is essentially is you're not going to have an activist investor come in and try to wrestle control of the board.
Right.
Like GM has had a couple of times, and I think a lot of what we're seeing from Mary Barra, and this is part, and certainly with Ford, some of the muddiness, I want to say that I meant to say this earlier, of the comments that we hear from some of the manufacturers is driven by the fact that they're trying to walk two paths or provide two sets of messaging. One for the investment community, because they all want to see. I mean, listen, when Rivian did their IPO, they hadn't sold a truck. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And you have these legacy companies with sound businesses
Right.
making huge amounts of profit, and they can't break through.
Right.
So their job is to generate wealth and generate return on the investment. So they have to. So they're going where the investment community is telling them to go. It's not where the consumer's telling them to go yet. We're not there yet.
Right.
The government has made it easier, I think, for that to happen. I used to think that, listen, if Biden loses and we're back to a Republican administration, then what happens to the manufacturer strategies? Well, clearly they've all, I mean, not they, but certainly the ones leading the charge with the legacy automakers, they've said it doesn't matter who's in office. We're investing these billions of dollars. We're going to continue making this investment, and we're going to keep pushing this. And we just think that's where the industry is going to go.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I agree with that, regardless of who's in office, left or right.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have shifts in tone.
Right.
I don't think you're going to have any massive shifts in actual strategy or shifting of investment from one thing to the other. I mean, this train has left the station at this point in time. It might veer a little bit one way or the other. It might slow down, but a Republican administration is not going to.
No, it's not. I think certainly the COVID and the chip shortage has helped.
Right.
Yeah. I think you just have to pick a direction as an industry and say, okay, this is where we're going, and just hope that when we get there in 5 to 10 years, when we come through this, we'll still be standing and be viable. And
it's just interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because what you alluded to is Tesla could find themselves in a situation where if they get to a certain increased level of volume, right, then operating without a dealer network could provide problematic. It could. Right. Again, we don't know, right, but it could. And then if that happens, does that at that time start to tarnish some of the allure, of Elon Musk in and of itself? Because there's been so many times I've heard people say, well, it just makes no sense, the valuation of the stock of Tesla. And I'm like, I don't think people are just buying Tesla. They're buying Elon Musk.
Yes.
They're buying SpaceX. They're buying everything that he's doing.
Right.
They're funneling capital into that universe.
Which is why you see so many stories of these Teslas sitting in service waiting for a part 40, 46, 50, 60 days, and the owner doesn't care.
Right.
Or the fit and finish isn't perfect. There's something's wrong. They don't care. But they would never put up with that from a Ford or Toyota.
But because they've signed on to this program, and it's now a part of their identity, and to some degree maybe even their ideology.
Yes.
And so now it's something, it's like, well, I'm willing to let some of this slide because this is now who I am. And being critical of it means that I have to detach myself from my own connected sense of who I am.
You just think about what he's been able to do on that front. But now with the potential acquisition of Twitter, he has completely flipped the whole political conversation on its side. I mean, whereas before maybe he was, maybe I don't know. The left was big fans. I don't know. I never really looked at it that way. There's plenty of people on Twitter talking about that. I don't know. But the fact is, he's clearly going to become, if he pulls off this acquisition of Twitter, he's going to become a darling of the right.
Yes,
for sure. So now, I mean,
did you see the meme that, and the left is freaking out about this, but it was basically what he's suggesting is that the left has just continued to move left.
Yes,
that the right has actually in some ways either held pretty steady or actually moved a little bit left too. But he's like, I was here in the middle, the right was to the right, the left was to the left. And over time, the left has moved further left, pulling the middle closer and then ultimately past me. He's like, I haven't changed, but now I just am on the other side of the center because this side. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But just like with everything about this, people are freaking out. And I said on a podcast I did this recently, it's like, okay, the left is freaking out. Oh my God, Satan has taken over communications and misinformation. We're all going, the republic's over. But on the other side, the right is a little bit too much like, yee-hoo, wee-hoo, he's going to save it all.
Well, what the right was saying that about Twitter beforehand.
Right.
I mean, so,
well, and I'm like, nobody is talking about the fact that he's got a company called Neuralink that's working on putting chips and computer technology in people's brains. Could there be another reason why he's buying a massive, technologically driven communications platform? I mean, I realize that's a little kooky down the road stuff, but I like to go there because it's fun.
Of course.
But you know what? Good for him. I like that he shakes shit up. I do. It's like.
Of course. I mean, he's, you think about personalities,
once in a lifetime.
It's certainly once in a generation.
Yes.
And he's one of them. And more power to him. I mean, I defended the dealer model. I love the dealer model. And am I being somewhat critical of the Tesla model? Just from a business perspective, I think it's phenomenal. I mean, the cars are fun to drive. I mean, he's created an entirely new
experience.
So
it's an experience.
Yeah. So, but is there a little bit too much Musk fandom? Yeah, I would say so. But that's how things get changed, and that's how the world moves forward or moves backwards. Who knows? It is that whole Twitter, that whole conversation. I think is troubling from a journalist perspective, because I think that misinformation is coming fast and furious from both sides of the aisle.
Yeah,
and I don't know that we are equipped, and I don't know that our government or our system is equipped to adequately handle or manage the challenges that the social media platforms present.
Well, it basically, in my opinion, it takes small conversations that 30 years ago happened around a dining room table or whatever in the amongst friends, amongst family, tight-knit commit. And now these conversations are happening, similar conversations are happening with worldwide access, worldwide exposure, right?
Right.
And so, you got some dumb people who say some dumb shit. You got people spouting off about things that they think they know about that they don't. I don't know, but how do you control that?
Certainly we talk about.
And does it need to be controlled? I don't know.
Well, I would say there's some measure of it that has to be controlled, because you don't want the human trafficking. You don't want the vile racism or violent language. And if you're a company, I think under our Constitution, you have great leeway in what you can control and don't control in terms of speech, right? On the part of what's published on your platforms to what your employees are saying publicly. I mean, I think you have some leeway. The Constitution provides us free speech from the government, and, in terms of freedom from government involvement in our speech. Doesn't necessarily provide it from a company business perspective. So the problem is that the Twitters and Facebooks have become such influential I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Or influencers of our thought processes as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you have a lot of bad actors, foreign state actors, who are pushing stuff that's not true. You have the whole, the whole AI imaging. I mean, there was recently, and I retweeted this not too long ago, but there was a person out of Ukraine that was pushing all sorts of content. Turns out it wasn't a real person. It was an AI generated being, so to speak. So I think we're at a point in our country where Twitter, let's just take Twitter for example, banning Trump or banning certain things of misinformation. And they've made some bad calls. They've made some bad calls on what they've banned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it turns out it wasn't misinformation. They've made some good calls. But nevertheless, the fact that they are such a prevalent and powerful part of our airwaves, and they have a lot of control on the conversation in this country, depending on which levers they push and who's controlling that. So, I almost wonder if our country, our government, has to step in and look at some of these companies as public utilities, maybe, as opposed to public companies. But now you have and I'm a little bit rambling here, but now you've got this Bureau of Misinformation, whatever. I mean, that's granted. The intentions are good, I believe. And I think, some of what they're going to do is good. But that is one of the scariest things I think to hear. Yeah, it's just and it depends on who's in the administration and how that gets applied. So
it's a super deep topic that
it is.
Nobody has the answer to.
No.
I think any person with any amount of common sense would say that specifically hateful speech, any type of very overt racism, or sexism, and who knows what that line is. I think that what I would only hope for is that it was not a partisan thing. It was just, listen, if it's dangerous, it's dangerous. It's not connected to some sort of ideology or message, right? And I think what we see is that it's shown that it can fall more on one side or the other, and that it serves a narrative. And we can't be there, right? We have to be in a place where, as adults, that we can have disagreements. We can come from different backgrounds, bring different ideas to the table, and that's okay, right? And disagreeing's okay. And I think we also have to recognize that just straight up hateful behavior, no, that doesn't have a place at the table.
No.
But differing ideas that are sometimes challenging and conflicting, that's okay as long as it's respectful. How any one person or organization or company can be the arbiter of that type of thought process, we're just gonna. These are things that we're just gonna have to learn to live with and recognize that it's skewing a little bit this way, it's skewing a little bit that way. Hopefully, a good handful of us can step back and just say, all right, well, I'm still going to formulate my own opinion based on what's out there. Let's shift just for a little bit as we kind of let's enter the final wave here, and let's turn this back towards a little bit more of like a plug for Cliff Banks.
No.
Not a plug, and I don't mean it that way, but let's round it out with a little bit more information on Autovate, what you've been able to accomplish with it, over the years, and where you see it going. Because having been involved with it with you and attending, it's a very unique experience and a unique event that provides a lot of insight and content that is not offered elsewhere. So where are you going with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you're going to see this year. It's going to be December 11th through 13th. Tentatively, we should be signing contracts now this week, I think. We're going to hold it in Scottsdale, Arizona. I think Phoenix is an easier town to easier city to get to. Austin was great, is great, but time to shake it up a little bit and grow. We have, some new partners that will be unnamed. I mean, I think and you're going to see, we're going to keep the same feel to it. High level, boutique type event, a lot of Q&A, not a lot of presentations. You go to a lot of these conferences and it's just people standing up with PowerPoints and you go to one, you've gone to them all. I mean, really. No, it's just primarily Q&A, a lot of networking focus. We really come at it from an investor perspective too, because like I said before, a few minutes ago, I think that investment aspect drives so much of the strategy and what happens in our space, and impacts the dealers in ways they don't fully understand. So we try to craft those stories. We try to tell those stories. I think one of the things I love about the retail space, automotive retail space, also isn't just the dealers, but it's the startups and the founders and these companies that grow from an idea, often from someone in a dealership, to a multi-million-dollar company and being sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. Or 100 million or 20, 50 million, what have you. But there's a lot of wealth, and I think it's a great laboratory for entrepreneurship in our country. Doesn't get covered a lot, doesn't get noticed a lot, but there are some big investors and big investment firms. I mean, just recently we saw, I'm going blank here. Company that just bought that is acquiring CDK, taking it private. I mean, it's a big investment firm, but they were squaring off against another large firm, private equity firm, global in nature. So I think with Autovate, we like to tell those stories. I think we also want to go to where the puck may be going, skating towards that. Driving the future is what we like to call it. Right. And I need to thank Alexi Veneri from Digital Airstrike for pointing it out to me at the last Autovate. I had driving to the future. She's like, no, get rid of that. It's going to be driving the future. That's what that's what this conference and that's what these people are doing. So, yeah, driving the future is the I think is going to become the mantra there.
That's a good one. I like it.
But we, Chris. I mean, I'm building it as I go along. I'm making it up as I go along too. It's hard sometimes to put it into words exactly, but
right.
But I think you notice. I mean, since you've been part of it, you've been there. There's a certain feel to it.
Yes.
That's informal, but yet it's controlled informal.
Well, I think there's a quality to it that is much like the quality of what we're doing right now. It's about real conversations. It's about meaningful information being shared in a way that's not. It's not a pitch. It's not a pitch deck. It's not a presentation. It's discussion, and everybody that goes, myself included, feels that wow, that was different because it was communication about what matters in the industry in a way that's not done elsewhere. Everywhere else, it's like it's a little bit song and dance traveling roadshow.
Well, we get some transparency that you don't normally get on stage. I think because of the nature of the conversations. It's also we hold it in December because I think it's the end of the year. It's past conference season. We have really the people that are there are C-level executives, either startup founders, entrepreneurs, investors, investment banks, some of the big players that are there that really, I think, their strategies, and they're very open in sharing what their strategic focus is and is going to be. And it provides an opportunity for business owners and people that are tasked with the strategic direction of these companies and investments to think through and to hear what other people are thinking and hopefully walk away with some nuggets and some things that, okay, I need to start pushing my company this way. We need to start thinking or looking at this. I will say this. One thing I'm really proud about is there's been at least 6 transactions over the 4 years that we've held Autovate.
Mm-hmm.
6 of the industry transactions at the vendor level, the conversation started at Autovate. So I like to think, we're also bringing people together to create action and to help move this industry forward and down, to where I think we're all able to make money, but doing it the right way and having some influence in what the future looks like of our industry. We are in an incredible period. I said this at the last Autovate. This is an incredible period of time. A lot of disruption. There's a lot of roller coaster type activity going on and a lot of uncertainty. But in that, there's opportunity to make a lot of money and to be wildly successful. But not just that, but to shape the future of what the automotive industry looks like. And one last tidbit I'll say, one of the, I think, and it isn't a retail thing, but back to your EV question, and you made a comment about the new technologies that are coming to the forefront. And that's not how you worded it. I'm paraphrasing, but I think one of the great opportunities that we're going to see is the battery recycling. I hope so. Yeah. I think you're going to start seeing some big investment plays there, but I think there's a lot. I think the road is wide open because really all we're dealing with right now are startups, and no one, I think, has a handle on the whole recycling aspect.
I still sometimes wonder, I'm like, why are not more people investing big money in essentially being the janitors of the earth? You'd think that maybe somebody's looked at it and it's not profitable. I'm glad to hear you're talking about it on the battery side because it's like, there's got to be money to be made.
Well, there has to be. When you think about when we start talking about the sales numbers that some of these automakers are talking about, and you start thinking about the supplies, you referenced this a couple times, the materials we have to get from the earth to build those batteries, well, it's quite possible that those materials can come out of recycled batteries too.
Right.
And, you can reduce the level of damage to the earth that I think, to your point, I think as we start moving fast forward into this EV world, we're going to see maybe more damage done than what oil drilling does. I mean, that's just, I'm speculating there, but
seems like that could be the case.
Yeah.
Well, Autovate, driving the future.
Yes, I'm really excited, about it this year.
Come a long way since the first one in Princeton, New Jersey, remember?
Oh, my goodness. That was... Thank you, Sheldon Sandler.
Yes.
Who helped, really, that was, his brainchild with me. We, boy, that was quite quite an event. When I think back.
I remember that event. I remember that time in my life, too. It was a good time.
Yeah, yes.
Well, you've taken it a long way, and I'm looking forward to being able to attend and see how it goes moving forward. Cliff?
Yeah, well, a lot of bigger and better things. I mean, we're going to grow it, but we're going to maintain that exclusive boutique feel, high-level touch.
Mm-hmm.
The same, we go high level with the receptions and the food, and none of that's going to change. I mean, I don't like nickel and diming that stuff. As you well know.
I will tell you that it has without a doubt been the best conference food I can ever remember having, without a doubt. It's always been wonderful and first class. So.
Well, good. Glad to hear that.
You got it, man. Great spending time with you, Cliff. Thanks for
Chris.
Finally making it, being here. We've got a little bit of a different event coming up here tonight.
Yes.
Won't quite
Should
be as
fun.
High touch.
Oh, that's okay.
We're doing tacos, though, baby.
Got the tacos going on. You got the music going on.
That's right.
It's going to be, it'll be happening here. Yeah.
Do you have earplugs?
I don't need earplugs. I go to these NASCAR. I've gone to these NASCAR races. I've been in the pits without the earplugs.
I can't even do that.
Really
okay. All right. Yeah.
So I'm good.
You're
fine.
good to go.
Yeah.
Cliff, great spending time with you. You are welcome anytime.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Chris. Love the podcast.
Thanks, man.
Great content, great guests. So
Thank you. I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy this one. Love you, brother. Thank you,
Right
man.
back at you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.